The laughter inside the mansion grew louder as Chinedu Okeke stood alone outside the gate, clutching the small bag that held everything he still owned. Just moments earlier, his wife's own family had called him a worthless husband, a disgrace, and a man who would never amount to anything because he had lost his job. When Adaeze chose to walk out beside him, instead of abandoning him, her father swore they would return begging one day. Neither of them answered, but years later, the same family would stand before Chinedu with tears in their eyes, wishing they had never slammed that gate shut. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about hope, resilience, and justice, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. Morning arrived long before the sun fully climbed over the skyline of Lagos. The narrow room that Chinedu Okeke and his wife Adaeze rented sat behind an aging mechanic's workshop where the smell of engine oil mixed with the aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby roadside stall. Their home was little more than a single room, with cracked walls, a small window that barely allowed fresh air inside, and a thin mattress placed directly on the concrete floor. Yet, every morning, Adaeze woke with the same quiet smile that had first made Chinedu fall in love with her years earlier. She carefully folded the blanket, swept the dusty floor, and placed a kettle over a small charcoal stove. There was only enough tea for 2 cups and a single loaf of bread that had already become slightly stale. She sliced it into equal pieces without saying a word. Chinedu noticed. "You always give me the bigger half," he said softly. Adaeze smiled without looking up. "I simply cut it in the middle." He laughed gently. "No, you don't." She finally met his eyes. "Maybe I don't." Neither of them mentioned that she had quietly skipped dinner the previous evening, so he could eat a little more before another exhausting day of searching for work. Chinedu had once imagined a very different life. Only 3 years earlier, he had worked as a mechanical engineer for a respected manufacturing company on the outskirts of Lagos. His supervisors admired his discipline. His colleagues trusted his judgment. He was never the loudest man in the room, but whenever a difficult machine broke down, everyone knew Chinedu would eventually find the solution. His future had seemed secure. Then everything changed. The company lost several major contracts after a severe economic downturn. Imported materials became more expensive. Investors withdrew. Salaries arrived late for months before stopping completely. One rainy afternoon, every employee gathered in the warehouse where management announced that the factory would close indefinitely. Hundreds of workers walked away, carrying cardboard boxes filled with personal belongings. Chinedu walked away, carrying only silence. At first, he believed unemployment would last only a few weeks. Weeks became months. Months slowly turned into nearly a year. Every morning, he ironed the same 2 shirts until their collars became thin. Every morning, he polished the same pair of worn shoes until they still looked respectable from a distance. Every morning, he carried a folder containing certificates, recommendation letters, and engineering qualifications that no employer seemed interested in reading. One company claimed they were not hiring. Another asked whether he had someone influential who could recommend him. Another quietly selected the nephew of an executive before interviews had even begun. Some simply never replied. Each rejection became another invisible weight resting upon his shoulders. Still, Chinedu refused to complain. He believed dignity mattered even when success disappeared. After finishing breakfast, Adaeze adjusted the collar of his faded blue shirt. "You'll find something." "I hope so." "You will." "You always sound certain." "I married you because I believed in the man you are not because of the job you had." Those words remained in his heart long after he left the house. Outside, Lagos was already alive. Yellow buses filled the roads with endless horns. Street vendors arranged fruits, vegetables, roasted corn, and bottled water along crowded sidewalks. Construction workers hurried toward unfinished buildings. Students laughed while wearing neatly pressed uniforms. Every face seemed to belong somewhere. Chinedu kept wondering where he still belonged. He spent nearly 4 hours visiting industrial companies, engineering firms, and workshops across the city. Some receptionists accepted his resume politely. Others barely looked at him. One manager glanced at his application before shaking his head. "We need younger engineers." "I'm only 35. We're looking for fresh graduates. I have experience." "We've already made our decision." The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. By noon, the heat became almost unbearable. Chinedu sat beneath the shade of an old tree near a busy bus terminal and opened the small container Adaeze had packed for him. Inside was rice with a little vegetable stew. He smiled. She had somehow managed to prepare his favorite meal, even though he knew money had almost run out. Before taking the first bite, he quietly whispered a prayer, not for wealth, not for power, only for another opportunity. While Chinedu searched the city, Adaeze spent her own day working as a receptionist in a neighborhood tailoring shop. The salary was modest, but every naira helped keep their small household alive. She never complained to her coworkers. She never told customers how difficult life had become. Instead, she greeted everyone warmly, believing that bitterness would only make suffering heavier. Late that afternoon, her phone rang. The screen displayed her mother's name, Mama Ngozi Okafor. Adaeze hesitated before answering. "My daughter." "Good afternoon, Mama. Are you coming home this weekend?" "I'll try." "You'll come alone." Adaeze remained silent. "You heard me. Mama. We've tolerated that useless husband of yours long enough." Adaeze closed her eyes. "Please don't call him that. What should I call a man who cannot provide for his wife? He is trying. Trying does not feed a family. He has never stopped looking for work." Mama Ngozi sighed impatiently. "A good man would never allow his wife to struggle like this." Adaeze answered calmly. "A good woman stands beside her husband when life becomes difficult." Her mother's voice immediately became colder. "You sound just like him." "No, I sound like myself." The call ended without another word. Adaeze slowly placed the phone on the table. Her hands trembled slightly. Not because of fear, because every conversation with her family forced her to defend the man she loved against people who refused to see beyond his unemployment. That evening, Chinedu returned home carrying the same folder he had taken that morning. Nothing had changed, except another company had rejected him. He tried to hide his disappointment. Adaeze immediately noticed. "No luck." He forced a smile. "Maybe tomorrow." She walked toward him and gently removed the folder from his hands. "You've carried this burden long enough today. I don't want you worrying." "I already do. I'm sorry." She placed both hands on his face. "Never apologize for fighting." He lowered his eyes. "I promised your father I would build you a beautiful home. You already gave me one." He looked around the tiny room. "This," she nodded. "A home is where I am respected." He struggled to speak. "I feel like I've failed you. You lost a job. I lost much more. You haven't lost your honesty. I can't even buy you the things you deserve." Adaeze smiled gently. "I didn't marry shoes, jewelry, or money. What if this never changes?" She answered without hesitation. "Then we grow old together, exactly like this." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Outside, children laughed while chasing a homemade football through the narrow street. Someone nearby played old highlife music on a radio. Life continued, even when dreams paused. Meanwhile, across the city, inside the luxurious Okafor family mansion, Chief Emmanuel Okafor sat with his wife Mama Ngozi, their son Obina, and their daughter Ifunanya around an enormous dining table. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. Expensive meals covered the table. Yet, the conversation centered on only one person: Chinedu Okeke. Chief Emmanuel placed his fork down. "My daughter deserves better." Obina nodded immediately. "I warned her before the wedding." Ifunanya added quietly, "People have started asking why our brother-in-law has no job." Mama Ngozi shook her head with visible disappointment. "Every month that passes becomes another embarrassment." Chief Emmanuel looked toward the large family portrait hanging on the wall. "I built this family's reputation through 40 years of hard work." He paused. "I refuse to let an unemployed man destroy it." None of them knew that at that very moment, Chinedu was kneeling beside his bed inside a tiny rented room, praying not for revenge against those who despised him, but simply for the strength to face another tomorrow. He had no idea that the greatest journey of his life had not begun when he lost his job. It had begun the day he refused to lose his character. The next Monday began with hope, even though Chinedu Okeke had every reason to wake up discouraged. Before dawn, he ironed his only white shirt once again, carefully avoiding the small tear hidden beneath one sleeve. The fabric had become so thin that he feared it might finally rip apart if he pressed too hard. His black trousers had faded after years of washing, and the soles of his shoes had been repaired twice by a roadside cobbler. Yet he stood before the cracked mirror in their tiny room, straightened his shoulders, and reminded himself that dignity did not depend on expensive clothing. Adaeze watched him quietly. She knew exactly what he was doing. Every morning he convinced himself that today might be different. Every morning she silently prayed that he would be right. She placed a neatly folded handkerchief into his shirt pocket. "For good luck," she said. He smiled. "You've given me this same handkerchief every Monday. And every Monday I believe it will finally work." He kissed her forehead before leaving. "I'll come back with good news. I'll be waiting." As the door closed behind him, Adaeze remained standing for several moments. She whispered another prayer, not because she doubted her husband. She simply knew how cruel disappointment had become. That morning, Chinedu had an interview with one of the largest agricultural equipment companies in Lagos. A former colleague had informed him that they were expanding and urgently needed experienced mechanical engineers. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine what life might look like if someone finally gave him another chance. He arrived nearly an hour early. Several other applicants were already waiting outside the conference room. Most were younger than him. Some wore expensive suits. Others chatted confidently about relatives who worked inside the company. Chinedu sat quietly in a corner, reviewing technical notes he had written years earlier. When his name was finally called, he entered the office with calm confidence. 3 interviewers sat behind a polished wooden table. The oldest among them adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Chinedu Okeke." "Yes, sir." "We've reviewed your qualifications." "Thank you. You certainly have experience." "I spent almost 10 years designing and maintaining industrial machinery." Another interviewer leaned forward. "Why have you been unemployed for nearly a year?" "My former employer closed after financial losses." "We know." "I've continued improving my technical knowledge while searching for work." The youngest interviewer glanced at his file. "Do you know anyone in our executive management?" Chinedu blinked. "I'm sorry. Anyone who recommended you?" "No." The room became noticeably quieter. The oldest interviewer closed the folder. "We appreciate your time." Chinedu hesitated. "May I ask if there's any concern about my qualifications?" "You are qualified." "Then, we've decided to move in another direction." The interview had lasted less than 10 minutes. As he walked out of the building, he noticed another candidate being greeted warmly by one of the executives in the lobby. The young man laughed comfortably, calling the executive uncle. Chinedu understood everything without anyone explaining it. Experience had once again lost to connections. He did not become angry. He simply felt tired. Very tired. Instead of returning home immediately, he walked through several neighborhoods, visiting smaller engineering workshops and repair companies. At each place, he repeated the same introduction. "My name is Chinedu Okeke. I have experience in mechanical engineering. I am willing to start immediately. I am willing to accept a lower salary. I am willing to prove myself." The answers never changed. "We're not hiring. Leave your resume. We'll call you. No vacancy." One workshop owner looked at him sympathetically. "I wish I could help." "So do I. But business is slow." "I understand." The owner sighed. "You remind me of my brother. What happened to him?" "He stopped believing in himself." Chinedu smiled faintly. "I'm trying very hard not to." Meanwhile, Adaeze finished her shift at the tailoring shop earlier than usual because her mother had insisted that she visit the family mansion after work. She knew what awaited her. Still refusing the invitation would only create another argument. The Okafor mansion stood proudly inside one of Lagos's most prestigious neighborhoods. Its iron gates opened automatically as luxury vehicles entered the compound. Uniformed security guards greeted every visitor respectfully. Adaeze had grown up believing this house represented success. Now, it often felt like the place where her marriage was put on trial. Inside the living room, Chief Emmanuel, Mama Ngozi Obinna, and Ifunanya were already waiting. No one smiled. Her mother spoke first. "Sit down." Adaeze obeyed. Chief Emmanuel folded his hands. "We'll speak plainly." "I'm listening." "How much longer do you intend to continue this suffering?" Adaeze remained calm. "What suffering?" Obinna laughed sarcastically. "The suffering of being married to a man who cannot provide." "My husband is trying. Trying is becoming his full-time profession." "Enough, Obinna," Adaeze replied firmly. "If the truth hurts, perhaps you should examine why." Mama Ngozi leaned forward. "My daughter, we raised you to live comfortably." "You did. And now look at you." Adaeze looked down at her modest dress. "I see nothing to be ashamed of." Chief Emmanuel's voice became stern. "Poverty may not shame you." He paused. "It shames this family." Adaeze felt her heart tighten. "My marriage is not your reputation." "It absolutely is." "No. You carry our name." "I also carry my husband's." Silence filled the room. Chief Emmanuel stood slowly. "You still have time." "For what?" "Leave Chinedu." Adaeze looked directly into her father's eyes. "No. You haven't even considered it. I considered it. And I rejected the idea before it finished entering my mind." Obinna shook his head. "You're throwing your life away." "I'm standing beside my husband." "He's dragging you down." "No." She answered more firmly. "We are climbing together." Ifunanya finally spoke. "Do you honestly believe he'll become successful?" Adaeze smiled. "I don't know what tomorrow holds." "Then why stay?" "Because love is not an investment that earns interest only during good seasons." Mama Ngozi sighed heavily. "You've become stubborn." "I've become faithful." Chief Emmanuel walked toward the large window overlooking the gardens. "When your mother and I married, I had nothing." Adaeze nodded. "I know. I worked day and night." "I know. I built everything you see." "I know." He turned toward her. "Your husband has built nothing." Adaeze answered quietly, "Not yet." Her father's expression hardened. I have watched him fail for nearly a year. He lost a job. He lost his usefulness. No. She stood up. He lost an opportunity. The room fell silent again. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Chief Emmanuel delivered words that Adaeze would remember for the rest of her life. If Chinedu truly respected you, he would release you from this marriage. Adaeze felt tears gathering in her eyes. If I abandoned him now... She swallowed. What kind of wife would that make me? No one answered. She picked up her handbag. I love all of you. She looked at each family member. But I will never build my happiness on my husband's heartbreak. Without waiting for permission, she walked toward the front door. Behind her, Obina muttered quietly, She'll regret this. Chief Emmanuel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared silently at the closed door. Finally, he spoke. Then perhaps life will teach her what we cannot. That evening, Adaeze returned home carrying leftover food that one of the housemaids had secretly packed for her before she left. When she entered the tiny room, she immediately noticed Chinedu sitting alone beside the window. His folder lay unopened beside him. She didn't ask. She already knew. She sat beside him and gently rested her head on his shoulder. They rejected you. Yes. My family asked me to leave you. He turned toward her slowly. And... She smiled through tired eyes. I told them I already chose my family. Confused, he looked around the room. What family? She reached for his hand. You. For the first time in many weeks, Chinedu felt something stronger than disappointment. He felt understood. Neither of them realized that every insult, every rejection, and every painful conversation was quietly shaping the people they were becoming. One family believed wealth determined a person's worth. Another couple was slowly discovering that true wealth often begins on the days when everything else has been taken away. Saturday arrived with bright sunshine over Lagos, but there was no warmth inside the Okafor mansion. Luxury cars lined the long driveway from early morning. Catering staff hurried across the courtyard carrying silver trays. Musicians tuned their instruments beneath a decorated canopy, while guests wearing elegant traditional attire and expensive suits greeted one another with laughter. It was Chief Emmanuel Okafor's 60th birthday celebration, one of the most anticipated social events among business leaders in the city. For weeks, invitations had been sent to politicians, company executives, church leaders, and wealthy family friends. Everything had been arranged perfectly. Everything except one guest. Inside their tiny rented room, Adaeze stood before the mirror, fastening a simple navy blue dress that she had owned for nearly 4 years. The fabric had faded slightly from repeated washing, but she had carefully ironed every wrinkle until it looked as presentable as possible. Chinedu adjusted the collar of his clean white shirt. You don't have to come, Adaeze said quietly. He looked toward her. It's your father's birthday. You already know how they feel about you. They're still your family. She sighed. I don't want today to hurt you again. He smiled gently. If I stay away, they'll say I'm disrespectful. And if you go, they may still say the same thing. Adaeze walked toward him. Then why put yourself through it? Chinedu took both of her hands. Because one day, I want your parents to remember that I never stopped showing them respect, even when they refused to give it to me. Her eyes filled with emotion. I wish they could see the man I see. Perhaps one day they will. She wanted to believe him. She truly did. Nearly an hour later, they arrived at the mansion by public bus, before walking the remaining distance beneath the afternoon sun. As expensive vehicles entered through the large security gate, Chinedu and Adaeze quietly joined the guests arriving on foot. Several relatives immediately noticed them. Conversations became noticeably quieter. Some guests exchanged subtle glances. Others whispered behind polite smiles. One elderly aunt shook her head. "So he actually came." Another relative answered softly, "He has courage." Or no shame. Chinedu heard every word. He pretended not to. Inside the reception hall, Chief Emmanuel welcomed important guests personally. When he saw Adaeze approaching, his face softened briefly. Then he noticed Chinedu beside her. His expression changed immediately. Mama Ngozi forced a polite smile. "You made it." Adaeze embraced her mother. "Happy birthday to Papa." Chief Emmanuel nodded once. "Thank you." His eyes moved toward Chinedu. "You came." "I wanted to wish you well, sir." Chief Emmanuel gave only a short nod before turning to greet another businessman who had just entered. The conversation ended there. Throughout the afternoon, Chinedu remained respectful. He greeted elderly relatives. He thanked the servers. He helped move chairs for older guests without being asked. When one elderly woman nearly slipped on a wet section of the floor, Chinedu quickly supported her before she fell. The woman smiled warmly. "God bless you, my son." Before Chinedu could answer, another relative quietly pulled the woman away. "He isn't your son." The old woman looked confused. She didn't understand why kindness had suddenly become unwelcome. Meanwhile, Obina watched everything from across the hall. His irritation grew with every passing minute. He disliked how naturally Chinedu behaved. He disliked that some guests seemed impressed by his humility. Most of all, he disliked that Adaeze never left her husband's side. As lunch was served, guests gathered around beautifully decorated tables. One of the family coordinators approached Adaeze. "I'm sorry." "Yes. Your father has changed the seating arrangement." "I see. You and your husband will sit near the service entrance." Adaeze looked across the hall. Every close family member sat near the main table. Only they had been separated. She understood immediately. "It doesn't matter," Chinedu whispered. "It does." "No." He smiled gently. "We came to celebrate, not to compete for chairs." They quietly walked toward the small table placed beside the kitchen doors. Several waiters looked uncomfortable. One even apologized softly. "I'm sorry, sir," Chinedu answered kindly. "You've done nothing wrong." Halfway through the meal, Chief Emmanuel stood to deliver his birthday speech. The hall gradually became silent. "My dear family," applause followed. "My respected friends," more applause. "I thank God for 60 wonderful years." Guests smiled. "I also thank everyone who has supported my journey." Again, applause filled the room. Then Chief Emmanuel paused. His eyes slowly settled on Chinedu. "There is something else I wish to say." Adaeze felt her heart tighten. She knew that tone. She had heard it before. Chief Emmanuel continued. "A family's greatest responsibility is protecting its dignity." The room became noticeably quieter. "When someone carries our family name," he paused again, "that person must represent excellence." Obina smiled faintly. Mama Ngozi lowered her eyes. Chief Emmanuel looked directly at Chinedu. Unfortunately, the silence became painful. Not everyone understands this responsibility. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked toward Chinedu. Chief Emmanuel's voice grew stronger. "A man who cannot provide for his wife should first learn responsibility before expecting respect." The words landed like heavy stones. No one spoke. Adaeze stood immediately. "Papa." Chief Emmanuel raised one hand. "I'm speaking." "No." Her voice trembled. "You are humiliating my husband." "I am speaking the truth." "The truth does not require humiliation. Obinna suddenly stood beside his father. Enough! He pointed toward Chinedu. This celebration is for respected members of this family. Chinedu slowly rose from his chair. I never intended to cause trouble. Obinna took several steps closer. Then leave. Adaeze stared at her brother. What did you say? You heard me. He is my husband. He is an embarrassment. Before anyone could react, Obinna reached for Chinedu's arm. Come. Chinedu gently removed his hand. There is no need. Then walk. Without arguing, Chinedu picked up the small gift he had brought for Chief Emmanuel, a carefully wrapped wristwatch that he had purchased after saving money for weeks. He walked toward his father-in-law. Happy birthday, sir. Chief Emmanuel looked at the gift, but made no effort to accept it. I don't need charity from an unemployed man. Several guests gasped quietly. Chinedu slowly lowered the gift. For a brief moment, disappointment crossed his face. Then it disappeared. He bowed respectfully. I wish you many healthy years. He turned toward the exit. Adaeze remained frozen. Her father spoke again. If you leave with him today... She slowly faced him. Don't expect this house to remain open for you, Mama Ngozi whispered urgently. Emmanuel. But he continued. You choose now. The entire hall watched. Business executives, church elders, neighbors, cousins, friends. Everyone waited. Adaeze looked at the mansion where she had spent her childhood. She looked at her parents. She looked at her brother. Then she turned toward the man who had never once blamed her for the suffering they shared. Without saying a word, she walked to Chinedu's side. She slipped her hand into his. I'm going home. Chief Emmanuel's voice thundered across the hall. If you cross that gate with him, Adaeze answered calmly. I already have. The couple continued walking. Neither of them looked back. Behind them, the enormous iron gate slowly closed. Its heavy sound echoed across the compound like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Outside the mansion, they stood silently beneath the afternoon sun. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Adaeze laughed softly through her tears. We weren't even allowed to finish lunch. Chinedu looked at her in surprise. She laughed again. I suppose we'll cook noodles tonight. Despite everything that had just happened, Chinedu found himself laughing too. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because the woman beside him had chosen him over comfort, wealth, and family approval. Far behind the closed gates, Chief Emmanuel believed he had protected his family's honor. He had no idea that the greatest mistake of his life had just walked away carrying nothing except a small bag, an unbreakable marriage, and a character that no amount of humiliation could destroy. Years later, when the entire nation would know the name Chinedu Okeke, everyone present at that birthday celebration would remember the exact moment they watched him leave through those gates. Only then would they understand that they had not thrown away a failure. They had thrown away the future. The first night after leaving the Okafor mansion felt strangely peaceful. The room Chinedu Okeke and Adaeze rented was small enough that they could hear every sound from the neighboring houses. Children laughed outside until late evening. A motorcycle passed every few minutes. Somewhere nearby, a radio played old Nigerian love songs. Neither of them spoke much while preparing dinner. A packet of instant noodles, one boiled egg, and a few slices of tomato were all they could afford that day. Adaeze divided the egg into 2 equal halves. Chinedu smiled. You always make simple food taste better. She laughed softly. That's because you're always hungry. For the first time in weeks, they laughed together without worrying about what anyone else thought. Later that night, while washing the dishes, Adaeze suddenly became quiet. Chinedu noticed immediately. What are you thinking about? She hesitated. I've been thinking about my parents. You miss them. I do. You should visit them. She shook her head. Not now. I don't want you to lose your family because of me. She dried her hands before walking toward him. I didn't lose my family. You walked away from everything. No. She gently held his hands. I walked toward the person I promised to stand beside. Chinedu lowered his eyes. I'm sorry your life became this difficult. Our life. He looked up. Our life became difficult. Those words eased a burden he had carried silently for months. The following morning, Chinedu left home before sunrise once again. Instead of searching only for engineering positions, he decided he would accept any honest work available. He unloaded sacks of rice at a wholesale market. He helped repair broken fences. He carried cement bags at a construction site. He even washed delivery trucks for a small transport company. The pay was small. Some days he earned almost nothing. But every evening he returned home with enough money to buy food for another day. He never considered any job beneath him. His father had once told him something he never forgot. Work never dishonors a man, only dishonesty does. Those words became his guide. One afternoon, after finishing temporary work at a warehouse, Chinedu sat beneath a large mango tree to rest. An elderly man sitting nearby watched him quietly. The old man wore simple clothes stained with grease, suggesting he had spent many years working with machines. After several minutes, he finally spoke. You repaired that loading machine well. Chinedu looked surprised. You were watching? I've been watching all afternoon. It wasn't difficult. The old man smiled. It wasn't difficult because you knew what you were doing. Chinedu laughed modestly. I used to be an engineer. Used to? I still am. Then why are you carrying boxes instead of designing machines? Chinedu briefly explained what had happened after his former company closed. The old man listened carefully without interrupting. When Chinedu finished, the stranger nodded slowly. My name is Adaeze Nnamdi. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I retired several years ago. Were you an engineer, too? I spent 40 years designing agricultural equipment. Chinedu's eyes widened. I've read about some of your work. The old man chuckled. I hope you only read the successful parts. Both men laughed. For nearly an hour they discussed engineering, manufacturing, farming, and the challenges facing local industries. It was the longest technical conversation Chinedu had enjoyed in over a year. He felt alive again. Before leaving, Adaeze Nnamdi asked one final question. Do you still enjoy solving problems? Chinedu answered without hesitation. Every day. The old man nodded with satisfaction. Good. He reached into his worn leather bag and handed Chinedu a folded piece of paper, an address. Come tomorrow evening. What is it? My workshop. You still have one. I keep a small place where I repair and improve old farming equipment. Chinedu looked surprised. I thought you were retired. I retired from earning money. He smiled warmly. I never retired from learning. Chinedu carefully folded the paper and placed it inside his wallet. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The old man stood slowly. I simply see something in you that shouldn't be wasted. Those words remained in Chinedu's mind throughout the journey home. When he entered their room that evening, Adaeze immediately noticed a different expression on his face. You look happier. I met someone. She raised one eyebrow playfully. I hope she's at least 80 years old. He burst into laughter. He's 82. That's much better. He told her everything about Adaeze Nnamdi. She listened with growing excitement. You really think he'll teach you? I don't know, but he invited you. Yes. Then go. What if it leads nowhere? Adaeze smiled. What if it leads somewhere? That simple question filled the room with quiet hope. Meanwhile, inside the Okafor mansion, life continued as though nothing had happened. Chief Emmanuel never mentioned his daughter. Mama Ngozi occasionally looked toward Adaeze's empty chair during dinner, but said nothing. Only Ifunanya finally broke the silence. "Do you think she'll come back?" Chief Emmanuel answered confidently. "When life becomes difficult enough." Obina nodded. "She'll realize love doesn't pay bills." None of them imagined that at that very moment, the unemployed man they had mocked was walking toward an opportunity that would quietly begin changing the direction of his entire life. The next evening, as the sun disappeared behind the Lagos skyline, Chinedu stood outside the address Adaeze Nnamdi had given him. Before him stood a small aging workshop filled with old machines, rusted tools, and unfinished mechanical parts. It looked ordinary, but Chinedu had the strange feeling that stepping through its doorway might become the most important decision he had made since losing his job. He took a slow breath. Then he walked inside. The workshop smelled of steel machine oil and sawdust. Chinedu Okeke paused just inside the doorway, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim light. Every shelf was crowded with gears, bolts, chains, and worn-out engine parts collected over decades. Half-repaired farming machines stood against the walls like silent reminders of forgotten inventions. Nothing inside looked expensive, yet everything seemed to have a purpose. At the center of the workshop stood Adaeze Nnamdi. The elderly engineer looked up from a workbench and smiled. "You came." "I said I would. Many people promise." He wiped his hands with an old cloth. "Very few arrive." Chinedu smiled politely. "I've been looking forward to this all day." Adaeze nodded toward an old tractor engine. "Then let's begin." Without another word, the old man handed him a wrench. "This engine refuses to start." Chinedu examined it carefully. He didn't rush. He listened to the sound of the loose components, inspected the fuel lines, and checked every connection one by one. Adaeze remained silent. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Chinedu finally spoke. "The engine isn't the real problem." "What is?" "Someone replaced one part with the wrong size." Adaeze raised an eyebrow. "You noticed. It forces the timing out of position." "And the solution?" "We don't need a new engine." He smiled. "We only need the correct part." The old man folded his arms. "Go ahead." Within half an hour, Chinedu removed the damaged component, reshaped a replacement from spare materials, and carefully reassembled the mechanism. When he turned the ignition key, the old engine roared back to life. The workshop filled with the deep, steady sound of a machine working exactly as it should. Adaeze laughed with genuine delight. "I knew it." "Knew what?" "You haven't forgotten." Chinedu switched off the engine. "I've never stopped being an engineer." "No." The old man looked directly into his eyes. "You simply stopped working as one." Those words settled deeply in Chinedu's heart. For the next several evenings, he returned after finishing temporary labor jobs. Sometimes they repaired broken irrigation pumps. Sometimes they rebuilt damaged harvesters. Other nights they discussed engineering drawings until long after sunset. Adaeze insisted that every lesson begin with one question. "Who are we building for?" At first, Chinedu answered automatically. "The customer." The old man shook his head. "No. The farmer. Closer. The family depending on that farmer." Adaeze smiled. "Exactly." He explained that true engineering was never about machines alone. Every improvement made work easier for someone. Every reliable design allowed parents to spend more time with their children. Every affordable tool could change an entire village. The purpose of innovation was not to impress wealthy investors. It was to improve ordinary lives. Those conversations slowly changed the way Chinedu viewed his profession. Meanwhile, Adaeze continued working long hours at the tailoring shop. Business had become busier, and her employer often accepted urgent orders before weddings and community celebrations. Instead of returning home immediately after work, Adaeze quietly stayed an extra 2 or 3 hours sewing hems, replacing zippers, and folding finished garments. The additional income was small. She never mentioned it to Chinedu. She worried that he might blame himself if he knew how hard she was working. Each evening she placed a little money into a small metal tin hidden beneath their mattress. She called it their tomorrow fund. One Friday evening, Chinedu arrived home earlier than expected. He noticed Adaeze carefully sliding the tin back under the bed. She looked startled. "I thought you'd be at the workshop. Pa Eze had church tonight." He glanced toward the mattress. "What's that?" Adaeze hesitated before bringing out the small container. "I wanted to surprise you." He opened it slowly. Inside were neatly folded banknotes. Not a large amount, but enough to show months of careful saving. "You've been doing extra work." She nodded quietly. "I didn't want you to worry." Instead of smiling, Chinedu looked deeply troubled. "You've been exhausting yourself." "We need the money." "You should have told me." "So you could stop me." He didn't answer. She sat beside him. "Listen to me." He remained silent. "I'm not carrying this burden because you're weak." She gently touched his hand. "I'm carrying it because we're married." His eyes became moist. "I wanted to protect you." "You are." "How?" "You wake up every morning and refuse to surrender." She smiled warmly. "That protects my hope." He lowered his head. "I don't deserve you." Adaeze laughed softly. "I hope you never stop saying that." The tension disappeared. For the first time in many months, they talked late into the night about dreams instead of problems. They imagined owning a small home. They imagined children playing in the yard. They imagined Chinedu designing machines again. None of those dreams felt impossible anymore. The following week, Pa Eze placed several worn notebooks on the workbench. "I've been waiting for the right person." Chinedu opened the first notebook. Inside were hand-drawn engineering sketches covering nearly every page. Agricultural tools, harvesting systems, small irrigation devices, improved planting mechanisms. Some designs had detailed calculations written beside them. Others remained unfinished. "What are these?" "My life's work." Chinedu looked up in surprise. "You never built them." "Some." "And the rest?" "I ran out of time." The old man smiled gently. "Perhaps someone else won't." For hours they studied the notebooks together. One particular drawing caught Chinedu's attention. It showed a compact machine capable of helping small-scale farmers prepare land much faster than traditional methods while using very little fuel. "It's brilliant." Pa Eze nodded. "It could reduce labor for thousands of families." "Why wasn't it produced?" "No investor believed poor farmers could afford it." Chinedu stared at the drawing. "What if they could?" The old man remained silent. "What if we designed it differently?" "Go on." "We remove unnecessary features. We simplify the transmission. We use locally available materials." His excitement grew stronger with every sentence. "The machine becomes cheaper. And more farmers can buy it." Pa Eze smiled. "Now you're asking the right questions." For the next several weeks, both men worked tirelessly. They measured parts, tested small prototypes, corrected mistakes, started over, failed, improved, failed again, then improved once more. Every setback taught them something valuable. Every improvement brought the design closer to reality. Back at the Okafor mansion, however, Chinedu remained the subject of ridicule. One evening during dinner, Obina laughed while reading a message from a mutual acquaintance. I heard our famous engineer is now repairing old tractors. Chief Emmanuel barely looked up. So he finally found work. Obina chuckled. Hardly. He spends evenings in some old workshop. Mama Ngozi sighed. What a waste. Ifunanya added quietly, Adaeze deserves so much better. None of them realized that the workshop they dismissed so casually was becoming the birthplace of an idea capable of transforming thousands of lives. Late one evening after another long session, testing mechanical parts, Adaeze and Chinedu stood outside the workshop, watching the sun disappear behind the city. The old engineer spoke quietly. Do you know why I kept inviting you back? Because I can repair machines, Adaeze smiled. No, because you never once complained. Chinedu looked surprised. You lost your career. Yes. You lost respect. Yes. You lost comfort. Yes. But you never lost your character. The old man placed one hand on Chinedu's shoulder. A man who protects his character during failure is the same man who can be trusted with success. Chinedu stood silently absorbing every word. For the first time since losing his job, he no longer felt like someone searching desperately for another opportunity. He felt like someone preparing to create one. The rainy season arrived in Lagos with heavy clouds that blanketed the city for days. Water collected along busy streets, slowing traffic and turning dusty roads into muddy paths. While many people complained about the weather, Chinedu Okeke barely noticed it anymore. His mind was occupied by something far more important. Every evening, after finishing temporary jobs, he hurried to Adaeze Nnamdi's workshop. The old notebooks had become the center of their lives. One design in particular refused to leave Chinedu's thoughts, a compact agricultural machine that could help small farmers prepare land faster, using less fuel and requiring fewer repairs than existing equipment. The original blueprint was impressive, but Chinedu believed it could become even better. One evening, he spread several sheets of paper across the workbench. I've changed the transmission system. Adaeze adjusted his glasses. Show me. If we reduce the number of moving parts, maintenance becomes easier. The old engineer studied the drawing. And manufacturing costs, nearly 30% lower. Adaeze smiled. You've been thinking. I couldn't sleep. Good engineers rarely do. Both men laughed. For weeks, they continued improving the design. Whenever one problem was solved, another appeared. Sometimes the engine overheated. Sometimes the gears locked unexpectedly. Sometimes the machine performed perfectly for an hour before suddenly failing. Each setback forced them back to the drawing board. Instead of becoming discouraged, Chinedu became more determined. Every failure taught him something valuable. Every mistake brought him one step closer to success. Meanwhile, Adaeze noticed the change in her husband. He still came home exhausted. His clothes were still stained with grease. His hands remained rough from manual labor, but something inside him had changed. His eyes carried hope again. One evening, while they shared dinner, she asked gently, "What are you thinking about these days?" Chinedu smiled. "A machine." She laughed. "I expected that answer. I can't stop imagining it." "You really believe it can help people?" "I do." "Then keep building it." "What if nobody wants it?" Adaeze reached across the table. "That's tomorrow's problem." He smiled. "And today's job is believing it can exist." Her simple confidence strengthened him more than she realized. The following week, Adaeze arranged for Chinedu to test the prototype on a small farm owned by an old friend outside Lagos. The farm belonged to a widower named Baba Sula, who had spent decades growing maize and cassava. His equipment was old. His harvest had declined every year. When he saw the unfinished machine unloaded from a borrowed pickup truck, he looked uncertain. "You built this," Chinedu nodded. "We're still improving it." Baba Sule circled the machine slowly. "It doesn't look expensive." "It isn't." "Will it actually work?" "We hope so." The old farmer smiled. "Hope is free." He pointed toward an empty field. "Let's find out." Chinedu climbed into the driver's seat. His hands tightened around the controls. Months of work depended on the next few minutes. He started the engine. It came alive immediately. The machine moved forward smoothly across the field. For nearly 15 minutes, everything worked exactly as planned. The soil turned evenly. Fuel consumption remained low. The steering felt stable. Chinedu could hardly believe it. Then, suddenly, the engine stopped. Complete silence filled the field. Chinedu closed his eyes briefly. Not again. He climbed down and quickly opened the engine compartment. Adaeze joined him. "What happened?" "The fuel line." "What about it?" "I underestimated the pressure." Baba Sule walked closer. "So that's the end." Chinedu shook his head immediately. "No. You'll fix it." "Yes." "When?" "As soon as I understand why it failed." The farmer studied him quietly. Most inventors would have blamed poor fuel. Others would have blamed the weather. Chinedu blamed only the design. That impressed the old farmer. 3 days later, they returned with an improved version. This time, the machine completed the entire field without stopping. Baba Sule watched silently until the final row was finished. Then he removed his hat. "I've worked this land for 38 years. He looked directly at Chinedu. "I've never prepared a field this quickly." Chinedu felt his heart race. "You really think it helps?" The old farmer nodded. "If ordinary farmers can afford this," he smiled broadly, "you'll change many lives." Those words echoed in Chinedu's mind all the way home. For the first time, someone outside the workshop truly believed in the idea. But belief alone could not build a business. Manufacturing even a small number of machines required money. Far more money than Chinedu possessed. The following week, Adaeze arranged meetings with several investors. The first meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. The businessman barely looked at the prototype. "Farmers don't buy innovation. They buy solutions," Chinedu replied politely. The investor shrugged. "They're too poor." "We designed this specifically because they're poor." "I'm not interested." The second investor listened longer. He praised the engineering. He admired the concept. Then he asked one question. "What property can you offer as collateral?" "I don't own any." "No house?" "No." "No land?" "No." "No significant savings?" Chinedu smiled apologetically. "No." "I'm sorry." The meeting ended immediately. A third investor laughed openly. "You expect me to finance a company started by an unemployed man? I expect you to examine the machine." "I've already examined you." Chinedu quietly packed his drawings without another word. Every rejection hurt, not because they criticized the invention, because almost none of them bothered to understand it. One evening he returned home later than usual. Adaeze noticed his silence. "Another meeting." He nodded. "How did it go?" "They rejected it." "I'm sorry." "They never even tested it." She poured him a cup of tea. "What will you do now?" He looked toward the engineering sketches covering their small table. "I'll keep trying," she smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." He laughed softly. "Were you ever worried I'd quit?" "Never." "Why?" "Because I know you." Outside, rain began falling against the roof. Inside, hope remained alive. Across the city, Chief Emmanuel attended a business dinner with several influential executives. During the conversation, someone mentioned an engineer developing affordable farming equipment. Chief Emmanuel paid little attention. There are hundreds of people chasing impossible dreams. Another businessman nodded. Perhaps. But this one seems unusually determined. Chief Emmanuel dismissed the comment. Determination doesn't build companies. He had no idea they were unknowingly discussing his own son-in-law. Back at the workshop, Adaeze carefully placed one hand on the prototype. Listen carefully, Chinedu. I'm listening. There comes a moment when every inventor must decide. Decide what? Whether to build something investors already understand. He paused. Or build something people truly need. Chinedu looked at the machine standing quietly before them. I've already decided. The old engineer smiled. I thought you had. Although every investor had turned him away, Chinedu no longer measured success by their approval. For the first time since losing his job, he possessed something far more valuable than employment. He possessed a purpose, and somewhere beyond the endless rejections, a single opportunity was already moving quietly toward him, one that would change not only his own future, but the lives of thousands of families across Nigeria. A week after their latest rejection, Chinedu Okeke sat alone inside Adaeze Nnamdi's workshop, staring at the prototype that had consumed nearly every spare hour of his life. The machine stood quietly in the center of the room. Its steel frame polished its engine, tested its performance proven on small farms. It was no longer just an idea. It was ready. The only thing missing was someone willing to believe in it. Adaeze walked over, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. You've been silent all evening. I'm thinking. Dangerous habit. Chinedu smiled faintly. What if everyone is right? The old man sat beside him. About what? What if this machine is useful but never reaches the people who need it? Adaeze took a slow sip before answering. There is a difference between impossible and delayed. Chinedu looked at him. Most people confuse the two. Those words stayed with him throughout the night. The following morning, Adaeze received an unexpected phone call from an old colleague. After listening quietly for several minutes, he smiled. I know someone. He glanced toward Chinedu. Perhaps you should meet him. Who? A woman. Chinedu laughed. You've become very mysterious. Mrs. Amina Bello. The name sounded familiar. Isn't she the founder of Bello Agricultural Supplies? The same. I've read about her. So have thousands of farmers. Adaeze nodded. Unlike many investors, she began her career working directly with rural communities. You think she'll listen? I think she'll listen before deciding. That alone sounded different from every other meeting. 3 days later, Chinedu carefully packed the prototype drawings, technical specifications, and field test results into a leather folder. He wore his cleanest shirt, polished his shoes once again, and prayed quietly before leaving home. Adaeze adjusted his tie. You look nervous. I am. Good. He looked surprised. Why is that good? It means this opportunity matters. She smiled warmly. And remember something. What? You don't need everyone to believe. He nodded. You only need one person. Mrs. Amina Bello's office overlooked a busy commercial district in Lagos. Unlike the luxurious corporate headquarters Chinedu had visited before, the building felt welcoming rather than intimidating. Photographs of smiling farmers decorated the walls instead of expensive artwork. A receptionist escorted him into a spacious meeting room. Several minutes later, Mrs. Bello entered carrying a notebook instead of a laptop. She appeared to be in her late 50s, dressed simply despite her reputation as one of Nigeria's most respected entrepreneurs. She extended her hand. Mr. Chinedu Okeke, it's an honor to meet you. I've known Adaeze for 30 years. So he told me. If he recommended you, you've already earned my attention. Those words alone surprised Chinedu. For the next hour, she listened without interrupting. She asked detailed questions. Why was the machine different? How much fuel would it save? Could local mechanics repair it? Would replacement parts be affordable? Could women farmers operate it safely? Every question focused on people rather than profits. Chinedu answered honestly. Whenever he didn't know something, he admitted it instead of pretending. Finally, Mrs. Bello closed her notebook. I'd like to see it. The prototype, she nodded. This afternoon. Back at the workshop, Chinedu demonstrated every feature of the machine. Mrs. Bello watched carefully. She asked to operate it herself. She examined the engine. She inspected the transmission. She even measured several components with a small tape measure she carried in her handbag. After nearly 2 hours, she switched off the engine. Silence filled the workshop. Chinedu waited anxiously. Finally, she smiled. It's not perfect. His heart sank slightly. I know. The steering can improve. Yes. The protective cover should be stronger. I've been thinking the same. She nodded. But... Chinedu looked up immediately. I've spent 30 years visiting farming communities. She placed one hand on the machine. I've rarely seen a young engineer designing with ordinary people in mind. He remained silent. You didn't build this to become famous. No. You built it because farmers deserve better. Yes, Mrs. Bello smiled. That's why I'm interested. Chinedu struggled to hide his excitement. You mean, I won't buy your invention. His expression fell. I'll invest in you. For several seconds he couldn't speak. She continued calmly. I'll provide enough funding to build an initial production run. He finally found his voice. Why? Because good ideas deserve opportunities. She looked directly into his eyes. And because integrity is much harder to find than intelligence. Adaeze smiled proudly from across the workshop. The following month became the busiest period of Chinedu's life. With Mrs. Bello's investment, they rented a modest warehouse on the outskirts of Lagos. It had a leaking roof. The paint peeled from the walls. The office consisted of a single wooden desk and 2 plastic chairs. To Chinedu, it looked magnificent. They hired their first 5 employees, a welder, a machinist, 2 assembly technicians, 1 administrative assistant. During their first meeting, Chinedu stood before the small team. I cannot promise high salaries immediately. Everyone listened quietly. I cannot promise easy work. He paused. But I promise something else. What is that? One technician asked. We will build machines that help people. The workers exchanged hopeful smiles. Our success will only matter if farmers succeed first. Those words became the company's first unofficial motto. Production began slowly. Every machine required careful attention. Sometimes parts arrived late. Sometimes suppliers canceled deliveries without warning. Electrical power failures interrupted entire days of work. One shipment of steel contained defective materials and had to be returned. Cash disappeared quickly. Mrs. Bello visited regularly. Instead of criticizing setbacks, she asked practical questions. What do you need? Better suppliers. Find them. What else? A backup generator. We'll work on it. Her confidence kept everyone moving forward. At home, Adaeze noticed Chinedu working later each night. Engineering drawings covered their dining table. Receipts filled his pockets. He often fell asleep while reviewing production schedules. One evening, she gently removed a notebook from his hands. You need rest. I need another 3 hours. You need sleep. He laughed. I forgot how exhausting dreams can be. She smiled. I've been waiting a long time to hear you complain about work instead of unemployment. He laughed harder. That's true. She sat beside him. Are you happy? He looked around their small room. The furniture hadn't changed. Their income remained uncertain. The future still carried enormous risks. Yet, something inside him felt completely different. Yes, he answered honestly. I finally feel like I'm moving forward. Meanwhile, across the city, the Okafor family remained unaware of everything happening. During dinner, Obinna casually mentioned hearing that Chinedu had found some sort of mechanical work. Chief Emmanuel barely reacted. It won't last, Mama Ngozi nodded. People like him always chase impossible dreams. None of them imagined that only a few kilometers away, 5 newly employed workers were assembling the first machines carrying Chinedu's design. Late one Friday evening, after the employees had gone home, Chinedu walked slowly through the quiet warehouse. 5 completed machines stood in a neat row beneath the lights. He gently touched the first one. Months earlier, he had stood outside the Okafor mansion, carrying nothing but humiliation. Now he stood inside his own workshop, surrounded by the first visible proof that perseverance could slowly reshape a person's future. The road ahead remained uncertain. The company had little money, no guaranteed customers, no promise of success. But for the first time since losing his job, Chinedu no longer wondered whether his life had a direction. It did. Now he simply had to prove that his dream could survive the real world. The first 5 machines were completed before the end of the month. They stood in a neat row inside the small warehouse, each one painted deep green, with the company name carefully printed on the side. Okeke Agricultural Solutions. The name still felt unreal to Chinedu. Only a year earlier, he had been carrying resumes from one company to another, hoping someone would offer him another chance. Now, instead of asking people for work, he was preparing to create work for others. Yet success was still far away. 5 machines meant nothing if no one bought them. One Monday morning, Mrs. Amina Bello gathered the small team inside the warehouse. We've built a good product, she said. Everyone nodded. Now we must earn trust. She looked at Chinedu. Machines don't sell themselves. I know. Farmers need to see them working. Chinedu agreed immediately. Instead of spending money on expensive advertising, they decided to travel directly to farming communities across southwestern Nigeria. They loaded 2 demonstration machines onto a borrowed truck and began visiting villages one after another. Their first stop was disappointing. Several farmers watched politely while Chinedu explained the machine's features. When he finished, nobody spoke. Finally, one elderly farmer stepped forward. It looks useful. It is. But we don't know you. Chinedu smiled. I understand. We've been cheated before. Another farmer nodded. Many people arrive promising miracles. They take our money, then disappear. Chinedu closed the brochure he had been holding. I'm not asking anyone to buy today. The farmers looked surprised. I only ask you to watch. He climbed onto the machine and demonstrated how it prepared the soil. Within minutes, the field that normally required hours of exhausting labor had been completed. The farmers exchanged surprised glances. Still, no one purchased a machine. As they packed their equipment back onto the truck, one employee sighed. We drove 4 hours for nothing. Chinedu smiled. Not for nothing. No sales. But they watched. They still refused. They'll remember. Mrs. Bello nodded quietly. Trust grows more slowly than crops. Their second visit produced similar results. The third village finally changed everything. Among the crowd stood a middle-aged farmer named Yakubu, who had spent years struggling to cultivate enough maize to support his wife and 4 children. After watching the demonstration, he approached cautiously. Can I try? Of course. For nearly 30 minutes, Yakubu operated the machine himself. When he finished, he climbed down slowly. "How much?" Chinedu quoted the price. The farmer became silent. "It's still expensive." "I know." Mrs. Bello stepped forward. "We've arranged installment payments." Yakubu looked surprised. "I don't have to pay everything today." "No." He looked back at the machine, then at his calloused hands. Finally, he smiled. "I'll take one." The warehouse employees celebrated quietly during the drive home. It was only one sale, but it was the first. 3 days later, Yakubu called. Everyone became nervous. Perhaps the machine had broken. Perhaps he wanted a refund. Instead, his voice sounded excited. "I need another one." Chinedu blinked. "Another. My brother wants one." "What happened?" "He watched mine. And he finished his own field in half the usual time." Word spread faster than anyone expected. One satisfied customer recommended another, then another. Soon neighboring villages began requesting demonstrations. Instead of waiting for customers, Chinedu and his team spent almost every day traveling across farming communities. Sometimes they returned home after midnight. Sometimes they slept inside the truck to save money. No one complained. Each satisfied farmer reminded them why they had started. Within 6 months, production increased from 5 machines to 20 each month. The warehouse became too small. Additional workers were hired. A second welding station was installed. Young technicians who had struggled to find employment suddenly had stable jobs. During orientation for the newest employees, Chinedu addressed the growing team. "I know many of you have experienced unemployment." Several workers nodded. "So have I." The room became quiet. "I remember exactly what it feels like to wait for someone to believe in you." He looked around slowly. "I promise that everyone who works here will be treated with dignity." Those words spread quickly among employees. People respected him not because he owned the company. They respected him because he remembered where he came from. At home, life also began changing. Chinedu and Adaeze remained in the same modest room, despite the company's early success. One evening, Adaeze suggested moving. "We could afford something larger now." Chinedu looked around thoughtfully. "We could." "So why stay?" He smiled. "I don't want success to make us forget these walls." She laughed softly. "I don't think I could." "Neither could I." Instead of buying expensive furniture, they repaired broken chairs. Instead of purchasing a luxury car, Chinedu continued using public transportation whenever possible. Whenever employees asked why, he always gave the same answer: "Money should first strengthen the business before it changes our lifestyle." Mrs. Bello admired that discipline. Most young entrepreneurs rush to display wealth. Chinedu invested almost everything back into production. One afternoon, a national agricultural magazine published an article titled, "A Young Engineer Helping Nigeria's Small Farmers." The article praised the affordable machines and included photographs from several villages. Orders increased immediately. Agricultural cooperatives began calling. Local government officials requested demonstrations. Banks that had previously rejected Chinedu suddenly expressed interest in partnerships. He accepted meetings politely, but he never forgot how quickly they had dismissed him before. Meanwhile, life inside the Okafor mansion remained comfortable. Chief Emmanuel's businesses were still profitable. Obinna continued expanding the family construction company. Their conversations rarely included Adaeze. When they did, the comments remained dismissive. One evening, Ifunanya entered the dining room carrying a magazine. "You should see this." She placed it on the table. The article about Chinedu's company filled 2 pages. Obinna glanced at the photographs. Another small startup. Chief Emmanuel barely looked up from his meal. These magazines exaggerate everything. Mama Ngozi closed the magazine. He'll disappear in a few months. None of them recognized how quickly the company had already grown. None of them noticed the company name. None of them even looked carefully enough to realize that the smiling engineer in the photographs was Chinedu himself. Across the city, Chinedu stood inside the expanded warehouse, watching another shipment being prepared for delivery. One of the newest employees approached him. "Sir?" "Yes. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "I searched for work for almost 2 years." Chinedu listened quietly. "No one gave me a chance." The young man smiled. "You did." For a moment, Chinedu couldn't answer. He remembered standing outside countless offices carrying his resume. He remembered the rejection, the humiliation, the hopelessness. Now someone else was thanking him for offering the opportunity he had once desperately needed himself. As the trucks departed carrying another delivery of machines, Chinedu realized something unexpected. The business was no longer changing only his own life. It was quietly changing the lives of employees, farmers, and families he had never met before. Without realizing it, the unemployed man who had once been thrown out of his in-laws' mansion had already begun becoming exactly the kind of man they had insisted he could never be. Nearly 3 years had passed since Chinedu Okeke walked out of the Okafor mansion, carrying nothing but a small travel bag and his dignity. During those years, his life had changed in ways he had never imagined. The small warehouse that once struggled to produce 5 agricultural machines each month had grown into a modern manufacturing facility on the outskirts of Lagos. The company employed welders, engineers, electricians, mechanics, accountants, drivers, and administrative staff. Every few weeks, another group of workers joined the expanding business. Yet one thing about Chinedu had not changed. Every morning he still arrived before everyone else. He walked through this factory floor, greeting each employee by name whenever possible. "Good morning, Ibrahim." "Morning, sir. How is your daughter's school?" "She's doing well." "Wonderful." A few steps later, he stopped beside another workstation. "Morning, Grace." "Good morning, sir. How's your mother feeling after the surgery?" "Much better." "I'm glad to hear that." New employees often found this surprising. Many factory owners stayed inside luxurious offices. Chinedu preferred walking among the people building the machines. He believed a company was not created by steel and concrete. It was built by human beings. One Monday morning, the production manager approached him. "Sir, may I have a word?" "Of course." "We've received another large order." "How many?" 150 machines. Chinedu looked genuinely surprised. "From where?" "A farming cooperative in northern Nigeria." He smiled. "That's wonderful. They've already paid the deposit." Instead of celebrating immediately, Chinedu looked around the factory. "We'll need more workers. At least 40. Start recruiting." The manager nodded. "Right away." By the end of the month, dozens of unemployed young men and women had been hired. During orientation, Chinedu stood before the new employees. Many of them looked nervous. Some had never worked in a factory before. Others had spent months searching unsuccessfully for stable employment. Chinedu recognized the expressions on their faces. He had worn the same expression himself. He smiled warmly. "Welcome." The room became quiet. "Some of you may believe today is only your first day at work." He paused. "I believe today is the beginning of something much bigger." Everyone listened carefully. "I don't expect perfection. I don't expect you to know everything. But I do expect honesty." He looked around the room. "Mistakes can be corrected. Dishonesty cannot." Several employees nodded. "My door will always remain open." One young technician raised his hand. "Even for ordinary workers." Chinedu smiled. There are no ordinary workers here. Those words spread quickly throughout the company. Employees respected him not because he demanded respect. He earned it. A few weeks later, Chinedu and Mrs. Amina Bello visited one of the farming communities using their machines. As they arrived, dozens of farmers gathered to welcome them. Among them was Yakubu, the first customer who had taken a chance on the company years earlier. He embraced Chinedu warmly. "You've become difficult to find." Chinedu laughed. "I've become busy." "That's different." The old farmer pointed towards several neighboring fields. "Come." They walked together through rows of healthy maize. "This land used to take my sons nearly 6 days to prepare." He smiled proudly. "Now we finish in less than 2. Several nearby farmers joined the conversation. One elderly woman stepped forward. "My grandchildren no longer miss school during planting season." Another farmer added, "I've doubled my harvest." A third man smiled broadly. "My children finally have enough money for secondary school." Chinedu listened quietly. These were the rewards he valued most. Not profits, not recognition. Real families living better lives. As they prepared to leave, a little girl ran toward him, carrying a handwritten drawing. "I made this." He accepted the folded paper carefully. The picture showed a farmer smiling beside one of his machines. Above it, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping my daddy." Chinedu swallowed hard. No business award had ever touched him the way that simple drawing did. That evening, back at home, he showed it to Adaeze. She smiled immediately. "I think this belongs in a frame." "So do I." Instead of placing it inside a drawer, they hung it on the wall of their modest living room. Visitors often assumed it was drawn by a relative. Chinedu never corrected them. To him, every family whose life improved through honest work felt connected. As the business continued growing, newspapers and television stations began requesting interviews. At first, Chinedu refused most of them. Mrs. Bello eventually convinced him. "People should know your story." "My story isn't important." "It is." "They care about machines. They care about hope." Reluctantly, he agreed. During one interview, a journalist asked, "Mr. Okeke, what motivated you to keep going after losing your job?" The camera focused on him. He answered slowly, "I remember what unemployment feels like." The interviewer nodded. "So your goal was success?" Chinedu shook his head. "My goal was opportunity. For yourself. For everyone still waiting." The interview spread widely across social media. People admired not only his achievements, but also his humility. Many young graduates began sending letters asking for internships. The company expanded its training program. Every year, dozens of engineering students gained practical experience. Meanwhile, inside the Okafor mansion, life remained comfortable but increasingly complicated. Chief Emmanuel noticed that competition within the agricultural equipment market had changed. A growing company was winning contracts previously awarded to larger manufacturers. During one business meeting, an associate commented, "Okeke Agricultural Solutions is expanding rapidly." Chief Emmanuel frowned. "I've heard the name." "They're becoming influential." "Who's behind it?" "I'm not sure." Chief Emmanuel nodded absent-mindedly. "I'll look into it later." But he never did. The name meant nothing to him. One Sunday after church, Mama Ngozi unexpectedly saw Adaeze at a local market. For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. Then Adaeze smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Mama." Her mother looked her up and down. "You look healthy." "I am." "How is—" She hesitated. "Your husband. He's well." Mama Ngozi expected complaints. She expected disappointment. Instead, Adaeze looked peaceful. "You still live together." Adaeze smiled gently. Of course. Her mother seemed confused. After everything that had happened, she had assumed the marriage would eventually collapse. Instead, her daughter looked happier than she remembered. The brief conversation ended politely. As Mama Ngozi drove home, she found herself wondering whether she had misunderstood something. For the first time, doubt quietly entered her heart. Late one evening, after everyone had left the factory, Chinedu stood alone overlooking the production floor. Hundreds of completed machines waited for shipment. Workers had gone home. The building was quiet. Mrs. Bello walked over. "You've been thinking again." He laughed. "You always notice." "What is it this time?" "I keep remembering the day I couldn't find a job. And if someone had hired me." He looked across the factory. "None of this would exist." Mrs. Bello smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes the door that closes behind us is the one forcing us toward the door we're meant to build ourselves." Chinedu nodded lowly. He finally understood. Losing his job had once felt like the greatest tragedy of his life. Now he realized it had become the first step toward a purpose far greater than anything he had originally planned. He still had no desire to prove his former critics wrong. His only desire was to continue proving that kindness, perseverance, and integrity could create opportunities where rejection once seemed permanent. 4 years after Chinedu Okeke had been thrown out of the Okafor mansion, life began changing in a direction no one in that household had expected. Chief Emmanuel Okafor had spent decades building one of Lagos's most respected construction companies. His reputation had been founded on discipline, careful planning, and wise investments. People often sought his advice before making major business decisions. For many years, his confidence had never failed him. Then, success slowly became overconfidence. It started with a proposal from a long-time business associate. The project promised enormous profits through a series of luxury housing developments outside Lagos. Investors competed to participate. Newspapers described it as the next great opportunity in Nigeria's rapidly expanding property market. During a meeting inside his office, one of his senior accountants spoke cautiously. "Sir, we've reviewed the numbers." Chief Emmanuel looked up. "And there are several financial risks. The market is strong." "Yes, sir." "The demand is growing." "That's true." The accountant hesitated. "But the company would need to borrow heavily." Chief Emmanuel leaned back confidently. "Every successful businessman takes risks. Some risks are larger than others." Chief Emmanuel smiled. "I didn't build this company by fearing opportunity." The meeting ended. Several experienced managers remained uneasy. No one challenged him again. Within months, construction began. Millions of naira flowed into the project. Then unexpected problems appeared. Imported building materials became dramatically more expensive. Several government approvals were delayed. Contractors demanded additional payments. Interest rates increased. Instead of slowing the project, Chief Emmanuel borrowed even more money, believing the situation would improve. It didn't. Meanwhile, Chinedu's company continued growing steadily. Unlike many competitors, he refused rapid expansion funded by overwhelming debt. During a management meeting, one executive suggested opening factories in 3 additional states immediately. "The demand is there." Chinedu nodded. "I know. If we move quickly, we'll dominate the market." Mrs. Bello remained silent, waiting. Chinedu looked around the room. "What happens if demand suddenly falls?" The executive hesitated. "It probably won't." "Probably isn't a business plan." Another manager added, "But we're profitable." "Yes." "So why wait?" Chinedu answered calmly. "Because I remember what it feels like to lose everything." The room became quiet. "We'll expand." He smiled. "But only as fast as we can afford." Mrs. Bello nodded approvingly. Patience had become one of his greatest strengths. Several months later, Chief Emmanuel received devastating news. One of his largest investment partners declared bankruptcy. Another quietly transferred company funds before disappearing overseas. Banks immediately demanded repayment of outstanding loans. The financial pressure became overwhelming. Inside the Okafor mansion, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The dining table that once echoed with confident conversations became unusually silent. Mama Ngozi finally asked, "How serious is it?" Chief Emmanuel answered honestly, "More serious than I expected." Obinna looked worried. "Yeah, the banks called again today." "I know. They're asking for another repayment schedule." "I know. What if we sell one of the properties?" Chief Emmanuel sighed. "The market has collapsed." Nobody spoke. For the first time in decades, uncertainty entered the Okafor household. Over the following weeks, more bad news arrived. Construction projects stopped. Clients canceled contracts. Creditors demanded immediate payment. Several company vehicles were repossessed. Longtime business associates suddenly became difficult to contact. The people who had once praised Chief Emmanuel's success now avoided his phone calls. One evening, Mama Ngozi looked through an old photo album. She stopped at a family picture taken shortly before Adaeze's wedding. Everyone looked happy. Everyone looked confident. She quietly touched Adaeze's smiling face in the photograph. "I wonder how she's doing." Chief Emmanuel didn't answer. For the first time, neither of them mentioned Chinedu with criticism. They simply didn't have the energy. Meanwhile, Chinedu remained completely unaware of the Okafor family's financial crisis. His days were filled with factory operations meetings with farming cooperatives and plans for expanding employee training programs. One afternoon, his human resources manager entered his office. "We've received over 600 job applications." "For how many positions?" 30. Chinedu looked thoughtfully at the stack of applications. "I remember writing applications like these." The manager smiled. "So do many of our employees." Chinedu nodded. "Let's interview more people than usual." "Even if we can't hire them all?" "Yes." The manager looked surprised. "Why?" "Because everyone deserves to be treated respectfully." Over the next 2 weeks, Chinedu personally greeted many applicants. Some interviews ended with job offers. Others didn't. But every applicant left feeling heard. One young graduate paused before leaving. "Sir?" "Yes. I didn't get the job." "I'm sorry." "But?" The young man smiled. This was the first interview where someone actually explained why. Chinedu shook his hand warmly. "I hope your next opportunity comes soon." The graduate nodded gratefully. Small moments like these mattered deeply to Chinedu. He remembered how painful rejection felt when delivered without kindness. Back across the city, the Okafor construction company reached a breaking point. Banks froze several business accounts. Employees worried about unpaid salaries. Suppliers refused additional deliveries. Obinna sat across from his father inside the nearly empty boardroom. "We've run out of options." Chief Emmanuel stared silently at the financial reports. "There must be another way." "I've contacted everyone." "No investors." "They've all declined." "What about the banks?" "They want guarantees we no longer have." Chief Emmanuel slowly removed his glasses. For the first time in his career, he looked defeated. That evening, Ifunanya quietly approached her mother. "Do you think Adaeze knows?" "I don't know." "Should we tell her?" Mama Ngozi remained silent. Pride had kept the family distant for years. Now that same pride prevented them from asking for help. Late one Friday, Chinedu visited a vocational training center sponsored by his company. Dozens of unemployed young people were learning welding machining and equipment maintenance free of charge. One instructor approached him. "These students are grateful." Chinedu smiled. "I was once where they are." "You never tell them that." "They don't need my story." "They'd be inspired." Chinedu looked across the classroom. "I'd rather inspire them by creating opportunities." As he prepared to leave, his phone rang. Mrs. Bello. "Good evening." "Good evening. I've received some business news." "What happened?" "There may be an opportunity to acquire several unfinished construction facilities at a very reasonable price." Chinedu listened carefully. "Which company?" Mrs. Bello mentioned the name. Okafor Construction Group. For several seconds, Chinedu said nothing. The very family that had once called him a failure was now struggling to survive. Mrs. Bello spoke gently. "I thought you should know." He thanked her quietly before ending the call. Driving home that evening, memories flooded his mind. The birthday celebration, the insults, the slammed gate, the humiliation. For a brief moment, he wondered if life had finally offered him the chance for revenge. Then he remembered something far more important. The lessons Adaeze had taught him years earlier. Character mattered most when power finally arrived. Standing at a traffic light, Chinedu looked through the windshield at the crowded streets of Lagos. He whispered to himself, "I won't become the man they believed I was." He had no idea that the hardest decision of his life was still waiting ahead. Chinedu Okeke barely slept after learning about the collapse of the Okafor Construction Group. Long after Adaeze had fallen asleep, he remained seated by the living room window, staring at the lights of Lagos stretching across the night. The city was as busy as ever, yet his thoughts kept returning to one family. The same family that had called him a disgrace. The same family that had thrown him out of their mansion in front of hundreds of guests. The same family that had tried to convince Adaeze to abandon him. Now they were the ones standing on the edge of ruin. He quietly asked himself a question he never imagined facing. What should a man do when the people who once humiliated him become the ones in desperate need of help? The following morning, he arrived at the factory earlier than usual. Mrs. Amina Bello was already waiting in the conference room. She noticed the tired expression on his face. "You've been thinking." He smiled weakly. "I couldn't stop." She poured 2 cups of coffee. "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart says, help them." "And your pride?" "It reminds me of everything they did." Mrs. Bello nodded. "Both voices are understandable." She allowed a moment of silence before continuing. "The question isn't whether they deserve help." Chinedu looked up. "The question is who you want to become." Those words stayed with him throughout the day. That afternoon, he asked his finance director to prepare a confidential report on Okafor Construction Group. Within 2 days, the documents arrived. The situation was worse than anyone had expected. Several projects had stopped completely. Hundreds of employees risked losing their jobs. Suppliers faced enormous unpaid invoices. If the company collapsed, many families who depended on it would suffer. Chinedu closed the file slowly. He wasn't thinking about Chief Emmanuel. He was thinking about the workers, electricians, bricklayers, drivers, security guards, cleaners, office assistants, people who had never insulted him, people who simply wanted to feed their families. He made his decision. During the next board meeting, several executives gathered around the conference table. One director spoke first. "The Okafor assets are available below market value." Another nodded. "We could acquire everything. It would eliminate a competitor." Everyone looked toward Chinedu. He remained quiet for several moments. Finally, he spoke. "We're not buying the company." Several executives exchanged confused glances. Mrs. Bello smiled faintly but remained silent. The finance director asked, "Then what's our plan?" We'll create a partnership. Someone frowned. With a bankrupt company? Yes. They rejected you in the past. I know. They'll think you've become weak. Chinedu shook his head. No. He looked around the room. I refuse to build success by destroying people who are already falling. The discussion continued for another hour. Some executives agreed. Others believed he was making an emotional decision. In the end, the board trusted his judgment. Over the following week, Chinedu quietly arranged something unusual. Instead of approaching the Okafor family directly, he created a development program for local infrastructure projects. The program would subcontract experienced construction companies struggling financially. Okafor Construction qualified. So did several other businesses. No special treatment. No public announcement. Only opportunity. Chief Emmanuel received the proposal through official business channels. He studied the documents carefully. The contract was large enough to stabilize his company. Yet one detail puzzled him. The funding originated from Okeke Agricultural Solutions. He frowned. I've heard this company name before. Obina looked over the papers. So have I. Neither man connected the name with Chinedu. The surname simply seemed familiar. After reviewing the financial terms, Chief Emmanuel looked surprised. They're offering fair prices. Obina nodded. Better than fair. And no unreasonable conditions. Should we accept? Chief Emmanuel hesitated. We don't have many choices. Within days, construction crews returned to work. Employees who feared unemployment received salaries again. Several unfinished projects resumed. Suppliers gradually regained confidence. Across the company, people celebrated quietly. No one knew who had made it possible. One afternoon, an elderly foreman gathered his workers together. I don't know who this new partner is. He smiled. But whoever they are, he looked around. They've saved hundreds of jobs. The workers applauded. Meanwhile, Chinedu instructed his legal department to keep his involvement confidential. One manager asked, why hide it? Chinedu answered simply, because gratitude should never be forced. At home, Adaeze eventually noticed something unusual. For several evenings, Chinedu seemed unusually thoughtful. One night, she finally asked, is something bothering you? He took a deep breath. I've been helping your family's company. She stared at him. You have? He nodded. They don't know. Adaeze remained silent. Are you angry? Instead of answering immediately, she reached across the table and held his hand. I married a good man. He looked down. Sometimes being good feels difficult. She smiled softly. That's usually when it matters most. A few days later, Mama Ngozi visited one of the construction sites for the first time in months. Workers greeted her warmly. Business had begun moving again. Hope had returned. She turned toward the site manager. I heard someone helped us. Yes, madam. Do you know who? They say it's one of our new business partners. Have you met them? Not personally. She nodded thoughtfully. For reasons she couldn't explain, she suddenly remembered Chinedu. The memory disappeared almost immediately. Surely it couldn't be him. Across Lagos, Okeke Agricultural Solutions continued expanding. Orders increased. New employees joined every month. Yet, Chinedu never mentioned the assistance he was quietly providing. Even Mrs. Bello admired his restraint. During one meeting, she asked, do you ever want them to know? Eventually. When? When discovering the truth no longer feels like a debt. She smiled. You're becoming wiser. He laughed softly. I'm trying. Several weeks later, a joint business conference brought together suppliers, manufacturers, and construction companies. Representatives from Okafor Construction attended. So did senior managers from Okeke Agricultural Solutions. Chief Emmanuel noticed the company's logo several times throughout the event. This Okeke company seems to be everywhere now. One businessman nodded. They've grown remarkably fast. Who's the owner? I've never met him. Chief Emmanuel looked toward the main stage where the keynote speaker was scheduled to appear. The program simply listed Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Chinedu Okeke. He frowned. The name felt strangely familiar. Before he could think further, organizers announced a short delay. The keynote address would begin in 30 minutes. Chief Emmanuel leaned back in his chair, unaware that the man about to walk onto the stage was not only one of Nigeria's fastest-growing entrepreneurs. He was also the unemployed son-in-law the Okafor family had once thrown out of their home. The truth was now only moments away from changing every life in the room. The conference hall buzzed with quiet conversations as business leaders, investors, manufacturers, and government officials settled into their seats. Banners celebrating innovation and economic development decorated the stage while journalists moved through the audience, preparing their cameras. Chief Emmanuel Okafor adjusted his jacket and glanced at the program once more. Keynote speaker Chinedu Okeke. The name still felt strangely familiar. He frowned, trying to remember where he had heard it before. Beside him, Obina scrolled through messages on his phone. I've heard people talking about this company all morning. Chief Emmanuel nodded absent-mindedly. They've expanded quickly. They must have powerful investors. Perhaps. Neither of them noticed Mama Ngozi sitting unusually quietly. For reasons she could not explain, she felt uneasy. A few rows ahead, representatives from Okeke Agricultural Solutions waited calmly. Mrs. Amina Bello smiled toward the side entrance. He's ready. A conference organizer stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Polite applause filled the hall. Our keynote speaker has demonstrated that innovation can create opportunity, strengthen communities, and transform lives across Nigeria. The audience applauded again. Please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Okeke Agricultural Solutions. A brief pause followed. Mr. Chinedu Okeke. The side door opened. Chinedu walked confidently toward the podium. The moment Chief Emmanuel saw his face, time seemed to stop. His breathing caught. His eyes widened. Beside him, Obinna stared in complete disbelief. Mama Ngozi covered her mouth with both hands. No, she whispered. It can't be. The man they had once called useless now stood before hundreds of respected business leaders, dressed in a simple dark suit, greeted by enthusiastic applause. He looked exactly the same, only stronger, more confident, calmer. He did not glance toward the Okafor family. Instead, he smiled warmly at the audience. Good morning. His voice echoed through the hall. When I lost my job several years ago, Chief Emmanuel felt his heart pounding. I believed my career had ended. The room became silent. I spent many months searching for employment. I visited countless offices. I received countless rejections. He paused briefly. I know what unemployment feels like. Many listeners nodded. I also know what it feels like when people judge your future by your present circumstances. Those words struck the Okafor family with painful force. Obinna lowered his eyes. For the first time since Chinedu had entered the family years earlier, he felt ashamed. Chinedu continued, I stand here today not because life became easy. I stand here because several people chose to believe in me before success gave them a reason to. His eyes briefly found Mrs. Bello and Pa Ezenamdi seated near the front. He smiled gratefully. Every opportunity I received became a responsibility. My goal was never simply to build machines. My goal was to build hope. The audience applauded loudly. Journalists continued writing notes. Several young entrepreneurs listened with admiration. Chief Emmanuel barely heard any of it. His mind kept replaying memories. The birthday celebration, the insults, the gate closing, the wristwatch he had refused to accept. Each memory felt heavier than the last. When the speech ended, the audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation filled the conference hall. Chief Emmanuel remained seated, not because he refused to applaud, because he could not move. After the presentation, dozens of business leaders surrounded Chinedu. Government officials congratulated him. University professors requested meetings. Young engineers asked for photographs. He greeted everyone politely. Meanwhile, the Okafor family remained together near their seats. Nobody spoke. Finally, Mama Ngozi whispered, "It was him." Chief Emmanuel nodded slowly. "Yes." Obinna looked devastated. "The company helping us—" He stopped speaking. Chief Emmanuel finished the sentence quietly. "Belongs to Chinedu." Silence returned. Everything suddenly made sense. The generous contracts, the fair payment terms, the respectful negotiations. None of it had been an accident. Their son-in-law had saved their company without asking for recognition, without humiliating them, without reminding them of the past. Mama Ngozi began crying quietly. "I called him worthless." Nobody answered. "I called him a burden." Her voice trembled, and he answered us with kindness. Chief Emmanuel closed his eyes. For a man who had spent decades leading others, admitting his own failure felt almost unbearable. Across the hall, Chinedu finished speaking with another group of guests. As the crowd slowly dispersed, his eyes finally met Chief Emmanuel's. For several seconds, neither man moved. Adaeze, who had quietly attended the conference after receiving an invitation from Chinedu, noticed the moment immediately. She gently walked toward her husband. "You don't have to." Chinedu looked at her. "They're still your family." She smiled softly. "And you're still my husband." He nodded. Together, they walked toward the Okafor family. Chief Emmanuel struggled to speak. When Chinedu stopped before him, neither man said anything. The silence lasted several long moments. Finally, Chinedu smiled politely. "Good afternoon, sir." The simple greeting broke something inside Chief Emmanuel. After everything that had happened, after years of insults, after public humiliation, Chinedu still addressed him with respect. Chief Emmanuel lowered his head. His voice failed. He tried again. "I don't deserve your respect." Chinedu answered calmly. "Respect reflects the person giving it, not the person receiving it." Mama Ngozi stepped forward with tears running down her face. "My son." The word surprised everyone. She had never called him that before. "I'm so sorry." She covered her face. "I judged you. I hurt you. I hurt my own daughter." Her shoulders shook as she cried openly. Adaeze immediately embraced her mother. Both women stood together in silence. Obinna approached more slowly. He could barely meet Chinedu's eyes. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." Obinna swallowed hard. "I treated you like you had no value." Chinedu smiled gently. "We all make mistakes." "No." Obinna shook his head. "I chose pride." Those words carried genuine regret. Even Ifunanya quietly wiped away tears. "I believed money could measure a person's worth." She looked at Chinedu. "I was wrong." People walking through the conference hall noticed the emotional reunion, but respectfully kept their distance. No cameras approached, no reporters interrupted. Some moments deserved privacy. Chief Emmanuel finally looked directly at Chinedu. "I've spent weeks trying to understand why someone helped my company." His voice remained unsteady. "Now I understand." He paused. You helped innocent workers. Chinedu nodded. Yes. You weren't helping me. I was helping families. Chief Emmanuel smiled sadly. You're a better man than I ever allowed myself to see. For the first time in many years, genuine humility replaced pride. As the family stood together, the weight of the past had not disappeared. Old wounds still existed. Painful memories remained. Forgiveness had begun. Healing, however, would require something even more difficult. Time. Chinedu knew that restoring broken relationships could not happen in a single afternoon. But for the first time since the mansion gate had closed behind him years earlier, another door had quietly opened. Not the door to wealth, not the door to success, the door to reconciliation. And sometimes he realized that was the hardest door of all to walk through. The weeks following the business conference brought a quiet change to the Okafor family. For years, the mansion had been filled with certainty. Every decision had been made with confidence, every conversation shaped by pride, and every opinion delivered as though it could never be wrong. Now the atmosphere was completely different. Silence had replaced arrogance. Reflection had replaced judgment. One evening, Chief Emmanuel stood alone on the balcony, overlooking the garden where he had once entertained politicians, executives, and wealthy friends. The carefully trimmed hedges and colorful flowers looked exactly as they always had, yet everything felt unfamiliar. He remembered another afternoon on that same property. Chinedu had stood near the entrance, holding a neatly wrapped birthday gift, a simple wristwatch. Chief Emmanuel had refused even to touch it. The memory made his chest tighten. He whispered to himself, I judged a man's future by his hardest season. Behind him, Mama Ngozi stepped onto the balcony. You haven't been sleeping. No. Neither have I. For several moments, they watched the evening sky without speaking. Finally, Mama Ngozi said softly, I keep remembering Adaeze's face. Chief Emmanuel closed his eyes. So do I. When she walked out of this house, I thought she was making the greatest mistake of her life. Mama Ngozi shook her head slowly. No. We were. The following morning, Chief Emmanuel asked Obinna and Ifunanya to join him in the living room. I've made a decision. Both children looked at him quietly. Our family cannot continue pretending nothing happened. Obinna nodded. I agree. Chief Emmanuel looked toward the large family portrait hanging on the wall. For years, I taught all of you that success meant protecting our reputation. He sighed deeply. I forgot that true reputation begins with character. No one interrupted. I humiliated an honest man because he had no money. His voice became heavier. I want to apologize. Obinna looked surprised. Privately, Chief Emmanuel shook his head. No. If I humiliated him publicly, he paused. My apology should also be public. At the same time, preparations were underway for Nigeria's annual Community Development Awards, an event recognizing individuals and organizations that had significantly improved the lives of ordinary citizens. Government officials invited Chinedu as one of the principal honorees for creating employment opportunities and supporting small-scale farmers across multiple states. When the invitation arrived, Chinedu smiled modestly. I wasn't expecting this. Adaeze looked over his shoulder. You deserve it. I've only done my job. She laughed softly. You still say that. Several days later, Chief Emmanuel learned that Chinedu would receive the national recognition. He quietly contacted the event organizers. I'd like permission to speak. The organizers sounded surprised. You wish to introduce Mr. Okeke? No. I wish to apologize to him. The organizer remained silent for several seconds before answering. I believe that would mean a great deal. News of the ceremony spread throughout Lagos. Business leaders, community elders, journalists. government officials, farmers from several regions, factory employees. Many planned to attend. On the morning of the ceremony, Chinedu stood backstage, adjusting his suit. Mrs. Amina Bello smiled. Nervous. A little. You've spoken before. Not to this many people. Pa Eze laughed. Imagine they're all broken tractors. Everyone laughed. The tension disappeared. Meanwhile, members of the Okafor family arrived quietly and took seats near the front of the hall. Several guests recognized them. Whispers spread through the audience. Most people knew the story by now. Many wondered what would happen next. The ceremony began with speeches celebrating entrepreneurship, innovation, and community service. Finally, the Master of Ceremonies announced, "Our final recognition honors a man whose work has created jobs, strengthened farming communities, and reminded us that perseverance can transform lives." The audience applauded warmly. Please welcome Mr. Chinedu Okeke. As Chinedu walked toward the stage, the applause grew louder. He accepted the award with humility. After thanking his employees, mentors, wife, and farming communities, he prepared to leave the podium. Then the Master of Ceremonies spoke again. Before Mr. Okeke concludes, another guest has requested permission to address the audience. Curious murmurs filled the hall. Chief Emmanuel slowly stood. Every eye followed him. He walked toward the stage without his usual confidence. For the first time in decades, the successful businessman appeared simply as an aging father carrying deep regret. When he reached the microphone, the hall became completely silent. He looked toward Chinedu. "My name is Emmanuel Okafor." No one moved. "Many of you know me as a businessman." He paused. "Today," his voice trembled slightly, "I stand here as a man asking forgiveness." The audience listened attentively. "Several years ago," he looked directly at Chinedu, "I publicly humiliated this young man." Silence filled the hall. "I believed unemployment defined his worth. I believed wealth determined a person's value. I was wrong." His words echoed through the room. "I rejected him. I insulted him. I encouraged my family to abandon him." He lowered his head, and when he became successful, he paused again. He chose kindness instead of revenge. Many audience members wiped away tears. Chief Emmanuel continued, "When my own company stood on the edge of collapse, the man I had rejected quietly saved hundreds of my employees. He asked for no recognition. He demanded no apology. He simply chose compassion." He turned fully toward Chinedu. "My son," the words carried genuine emotion, "I cannot erase the pain I caused. But before everyone gathered here today," he slowly bowed his head, "I ask for your forgiveness." The entire hall remained silent. No one expected such humility. No one expected such honesty. All eyes turned toward Chinedu. He stood quietly for several moments. The audience waited. Journalists stopped writing. Even photographers lowered their cameras. Finally, Chinedu walked toward Chief Emmanuel. The older man remained with his head lowered. Chinedu gently placed one hand on his shoulder. When Chief Emmanuel looked up, he saw no anger, only peace. Chinedu spoke calmly into the microphone. "There was a time when I believed losing my job was the greatest tragedy of my life." He smiled gently. "Today, I understand something different." He looked around the hall. "If I had never experienced rejection, I might never have learned compassion." He turned back toward Chief Emmanuel. "I forgave you a long time ago." Tears filled the older man's eyes. "But forgiveness," Chinedu continued, "doesn't erase the past. It teaches us how to build a better future." Without hesitation, he embraced his father-in-law. The audience rose to its feet. Applause filled the hall for several minutes, not because a successful businessman had received an award, but because two men had chosen healing over hatred. At that moment, everyone present understood that Chinedu's greatest achievement had never been building a successful company. It had been protecting his character through every season of his life. Several months after the Community Development Awards, life settled into a new rhythm for everyone connected to Chinedu Okeke. The newspapers gradually moved on to other stories. Television interviews became less frequent. Business conferences continued without the emotional reunion that had captured national attention. Yet, for Chinedu, the most meaningful changes happened far away from cameras and headlines. They happened in ordinary moments. One Saturday morning, he arrived at the factory before sunrise, just as he always had. The security guard at the entrance smiled. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Musa. You've beaten everyone here again." Chinedu laughed. "I enjoy the quiet." He walked slowly across the factory floor. Machines stood ready for another day of production. Forklifts rested silently in their charging stations. Rows of completed agricultural equipment waited to be delivered to farming communities across Nigeria. Several years earlier, he had wandered the streets searching desperately for someone willing to employ him. Now, more than 400 people earned a living through the company he had built. He never allowed himself to forget that difference. Instead of entering his office immediately, he stopped beside the large notice board displaying employee achievements. New apprentices had completed their training. Several workers had earned promotions. Another group of technicians had graduated from the company's vocational scholarship program. Chinedu smiled quietly. These successes meant as much to him as any financial report. Later that morning, he met with the management team. The finance director opened the meeting. "Our profits exceeded expectations again this quarter." Another executive added, "We're receiving inquiries from neighboring countries." Mrs. Amina Bello looked toward Chinedu. "There are opportunities to expand into Ghana and Kenya." Everyone waited for his response. Several years earlier, he might have accepted immediately. Instead, he asked a different question. "Are our current employees fully prepared for that growth?" The operations manager answered honestly, "Not yet." "Then we wait." Nobody argued. Everyone already understood how he made decisions. Growth mattered, but people mattered more. After the meeting, Chinedu visited the training workshop where a new group of apprentices practiced welding under the supervision of experienced technicians. One young trainee approached him nervously. "Sir?" "Yes. I wanted to thank you." "What for?" "I applied for work everywhere." The young man smiled shyly. "No one believed I could learn." Chinedu placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know that feeling. My mother cried when I got this opportunity. I hope one day you'll give someone else the same chance." The trainee nodded confidently. "I will." Watching the young man return to work, Chinedu realized that kindness often traveled much farther than anyone could see. One opportunity created another, then another, and another. That afternoon, Adaeze arrived at the factory carrying homemade lunch. Employees greeted her warmly. Many called her Mama Ada because she remembered birthdays, visited sick workers, and quietly helped families facing difficult times. She entered Chinedu's office smiling. "You skipped breakfast again." He looked guilty. "I was busy." "You always say that." She unpacked the food. "As your wife, I officially reject that excuse." He laughed. "I surrender." While they ate together, Adaeze looked through the office window at workers leaving for lunch. "Do you ever think about the old days?" "Every day." "Do they still hurt?" Chinedu thought carefully before answering. "The memories remain." "And the pain?" He smiled gently. "It became gratitude." She reached for his hand. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done any of this without you. She shook her head. We did it together. Those words remained as true as ever. Meanwhile, the relationship with the Okafor family slowly continued healing. It did not happen overnight. Trust rebuilt itself one conversation at a time. One Sunday afternoon, Chief Emmanuel invited Chinedu and Adaeze to lunch at the family mansion. For the first time since the painful birthday years earlier, Chinedu walked through the front gate without carrying fear. Mama Ngozi welcomed them with a warm embrace. I'm so happy you're here. So are we, Adaeze replied. Inside the dining room, the atmosphere felt completely different. There were no whispered judgments, no uncomfortable glances, no comments about money or status. Instead, the conversation centered on family community projects and future plans. Halfway through the meal, Chief Emmanuel quietly stood. I have something for you. He disappeared briefly before returning with a small gift box. Chinedu looked surprised. You didn't have to. I know. Chief Emmanuel smiled. But I wanted to. Inside the box lay the same wristwatch Chinedu had once offered him years earlier, perfectly preserved. I found it after that birthday. Chief Emmanuel's voice became emotional. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. He looked down. I also couldn't find the courage to return it. He gently placed the watch into Chinedu's hands. It belongs to you. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Chinedu fastened the watch around his wrist. I'll treasure it. Chief Emmanuel smiled through tears. So will I. That simple gesture closed a wound words alone could never have healed. Months later, Okeke Agricultural Solutions celebrated its 5th anniversary. Employees, farmers, suppliers, and community leaders gathered at the factory for a modest celebration. Instead of hiring celebrities, Chinedu invited several farming families to share their experiences. Yakubu, the company's first customer, stood before the audience. When I bought the first machine, he smiled. My neighbors laughed. The crowd chuckled. Today, he looked around proudly, our entire farming cooperative uses them. Applause filled the hall. Another speaker described how stable employment had allowed her children to finish school. A young engineer explained how the company's apprenticeship program had changed his future. Each story reminded everyone why the company existed. As the celebration ended, journalists asked Chinedu one final question. Mr. Okeke. He turned toward them. If you could speak to the unemployed man you once were. He smiled thoughtfully. What would you tell him? The crowd became quiet. Chinedu answered slowly. I would tell him not to measure his future by today's disappointment. He looked toward Adaeze. I would tell him to treasure the people who believe in him before success arrives. His eyes moved toward Chief Emmanuel and Mama Ngozi. And I would remind him that forgiveness is never a gift we give only to others. He paused. It also frees ourselves. As the sun began setting behind the factory, employees laughed together while children played between rows of machines that had once existed only as sketches inside an old notebook. Chinedu stood quietly beside Adaeze. Years earlier, they had walked away from a mansion, carrying nothing but faith in each other. Today they possessed far more than wealth. They had earned respect. They had restored a broken family. They had created opportunities for thousands of strangers. Most importantly, they had proven that true greatness is never measured by the amount of money a person owns. It is measured by the number of lives they choose to lift when they finally have the power to do so. Life has a remarkable way of testing our character before rewarding our perseverance. Chinedu's journey reminds us that unemployment, failure, or rejection are not permanent definitions of who we are. They are temporary seasons, not lifelong identities. The people who judge others by their lowest moments often discover too late that today's struggle may become tomorrow's greatest success story. True wealth is not found in luxury homes, expensive cars, or impressive titles. It is found in integrity when no one is watching, in loyalty when life becomes difficult, and in kindness when revenge would be easier. Adaeze stood beside her husband when everyone else walked away, proving that real love is measured not during seasons of abundance, but during seasons of hardship. Chinedu chose compassion instead of bitterness, showing that forgiveness is one of the greatest victories a person can ever achieve. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been judged unfairly or stood by someone during their hardest season? We'd love to hear your story. Also, tell us which country you're watching from and what your local time is right now. It is always inspiring to see how far this community reaches around the world. If you enjoy emotional stories about hope, resilience, family, and justice, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories that remind us all never to give up on ourselves or on the people we love.